Hey folks, welcome to our next video on requisitions and issuing. So most of these are going to apply to larger operations. First thing I want to talk about is the types of storerooms. So we have open storeroom where employees gather products by themselves. So basically there's a free-for-all. If anybody needs anything, they can just walk into a storeroom, get what they need, and take it back to their station and work on it. The other type of storeroom is a closed storeroom. In a closed storeroom, employees make a written request for products, request filled by a storeroom clerk or a manager. Now, a closed storeroom ties in with the old perpetual inventory system that I talked about in previous video. So this is where we have someone that basically guards that storeroom and doesn't let anybody take anything out of it without the proper paperwork in order to control your inventory. It's a great system, but it costs you some money by having a storeroom clerk there. But you know, because if you're using a perpetual inventory system, you know exactly how much product is there, right? Now you may come across situations where you have both. I think I mentioned this when I was talking about the periodic and perpetual inventory systems, right? Even in a very simplest of kitchens, you may have an open storeroom for 99% of all your product, but then a closed storeroom for specific items, i.e. a locked liquor cabinet that only the chef has access to, expensive ingredients like caviar or saffron or things like that, that only a manager would have access to. I've even worked in locations where we had a meat cage in a cooler, so all of our proteins, steaks and whatnot, were in this cage in the cooler that was locked that only a sous chef or a manager had, right? So a combination is not unheard of. So if you have a closed storeroom, you're going to create a requisition or a written request on paper or electronically for products from that storeroom. That way we can keep track of where those products went and how much was used. And it really comes in handy if you're in an operation that has multiple restaurants or multiple outlets, right? You know, oh, the ABC restaurant used 14 cases of this and XYZ restaurant used 18 cases of that, right? So we can track down if there's any overproduction or overusage of ingredients, right? Issuing is the process in which we release those requested products from the storeroom to an employee. Now, this can happen in one of two ways. You know, the employee can go to the storeroom and physically get the ingredients with the proper requisition, and the storeroom clerk can give them that product, or a requisition could be submitted and then that storeroom clerk is responsible to deliver it to that restaurant or outlet. It's going to be different in every operation how they physically manage it, right? But the big difference, right, and the pros and cons, closed storeroom, obviously you have more control. You can control what goes in, what goes out, you know where it's going, you can track down products easily. If you have a recall on a product and you have multiple outlets in your establishment, you have a recall on, say, romaine lettuce, you know exactly how many cases of what went where, right? You can look it up on your computer tracking, right? But, you know, the con is it's more costly and requires higher labor, the store manager or clerk. It also requires physical space that can be set aside for that storeroom. And open storerooms, they're easier for everybody to work, but they're less secure. You don't have the extra cost of the labor in there, but you don't have the control. And trying to track down recalled products, if you have multiple outlets, is going to be a little bit more difficult, right? So what can we do to control our storerooms and make them a little bit more efficient or locked down, so to speak, right? So in open storerooms, we can keep the storeroom only open briefly and watch employees closely during that time, right? So we can sort of keep it open when we're working, and then in after hours you can close it and lock it, right? Lock coolers at the end of the day or the end of the night or the end of the shift or whatnot, right? So that not everybody, janitorial staff or, you know, that in the evening have access to that area, right? Only managers can access the storeroom when not actively open. We're going to keep expensive items locked up, then only a manager can access them. This is sort of where we get into that overlap of a closed storeroom with an open storeroom, right? Like I mentioned, a very common one is having liquor ingredients locked in a separate cabinet in the chef's office or somewhere that, and only the chef or maybe a sous chef has the key or combination to, right? How can we generate controls? We and conduct regular inventories to catch high food cost problems early. So if we're doing regular inventories and we notice that we're consuming a lot of a certain product, but it doesn't match our sales, we got to ask ourselves, is it leaving through the back door or in somebody's backpack, or do we have a theft issue, right? And obviously we can install security cameras. Now, the one thing to be aware of, that security cameras are only as good as the quality of video you get out of them. I say this because we've all seen, security camera videos on social media of, hey, can you identify this guy that stole the package off my porch? And I can't tell if it's a guy, a girl, a Sasquatch, or what, because the camera quality is so low, right? So one, you got to make sure the camera quality is a good quality that you could identify someone in the camera. Two, you need to make sure that the cameras can't be moved manually. There was a situation that I had at one place where I worked, where I had a camera that shot down a long hallway of coolers, so I could see who went into and out of all the coolers. And one day I came into work and I was missing a whole prime rib. And a whole prime rib is a good chunk of change. So I went to the cameras. And at about 5 in the morning, I saw the camera go from looking down the hallway in these coolers to looking at the roof. Somebody had, I assume, taken a broom or something and snuck in under the camera and pushed the camera up into the ceiling. So useless, right? So make sure if you're getting security cameras, they're quality and they can't be tampered with. Okay. So the requisition and issuing process: the employee writes a requisition, the manager signs it, then the storeroom clerk would fill that requisition order, either by delivery or by the employee picking it up, right? The clerk's then going to record the cost per unit and the extended cost and date and department of the requisition. So we know exactly how much dollar amount the food went to outlet ABC in our hotel or resort. The employee picks up the filled order and signs the requisition, or like I said, it gets delivered and the employee signs the requisition, right? We're always going to do a physical inventory periodically and reconcile against our prior inventory deliveries or requisitions. This is for a closed storeroom, right? We're always going to double check that we tracked everything properly with it coming in from orders from suppliers and then going out with requisitions, right? The last thing we need to talk about in this process is transfers. Now, I mentioned these when we were calculating our food cost, right? So the transfer is issuing or receiving food from another department or business unit, i.e. going from the kitchen to the bar or lounge or vice versa, right? You should have some sort of form to track this so that the bar gets their credit for the bottle of whiskey that went to the kitchen and the kitchen gets their credit for the case of lemons that went out to the bar, right? Should include which departments, how much, and then we can send those to the cost control manager or accounting department to make sure that those are applied to the food cost at the end of the month. Okay, so that's our video on requisitions and issuing. The next 4 videos I'm going to talk about inventory valuation methods.